2022 was thought to be the year of economic recovery, a year to finally leave behind the COVID-19 pandemic and its brutal economic impacts. However, just 2 months in, the world finds itself grappling with yet another major European conflict. The recovery now seems far off, and once again, it's time for damage control. The war will not just ravage lives, it will also destroy livelihoods. While Ukraine suffers the bloody consequences of a foreign invasion, the negative economic impacts are being felt across the globe. Dwindling oil and gas supplies, rising inflation, and broken supply chains will all play a part in a potential economic meltdown. Just recently, the World Trade Organization updated this year's growth forecast to 2.8% from 4.1% before the war. But how exactly would a war thousands of miles away from its borders hurt the financial stability of the United States of America? Much of it has to do with globalization and a web of complex economic interdependence. Stay with me until the end to see how this potential economic downturn must play out in the United States of America. Also, if you enjoy economics content, consider subscribing to my channel. Researching these stories takes a lot of time, and only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribed. It's free and you can always unsubscribe. For the past 2 years, the US economy was straining under the burdens of the coronavirus pandemic. Businesses were closed as the death toll kept rising and social distancing mandates were adopted throughout the country. In all, the economy contracted more than 19% under the pandemic. However, it was finally getting back on track when Russia acted on its plan of invading Ukraine. Though it is a war thousands of miles away from its shores, the connectivity of the world at large means that there is no escaping the consequences. The first and most expected impact of Russia's actions was a surge in oil prices. Russia contributes 10% of the global oil production, and a fear of losing that supply drove the prices up. By early March, oil prices were reaching a level not seen since the Great Recession. This predictably sent the gasoline prices skyrocketing across the country. In fact, the average prices have never been higher. Now, you might think that this doesn't make any sense, as the US itself is a larger producer of oil than Russia. However, oil is a global commodity, and a supply shock anywhere in the world translates into a spike in prices domestically. But this isn't where it all stops. Oil prices impact commodity prices, causing inflation away from the gas station. By the start of March, inflation was already at a 40-year high of 7.5%. And with uncertainty mounting around supply chains, the only way was up. So by April, the inflation is predicted to be over 8%. These numbers were last seen during the oil shock of the 70s. One option for the government is for the Federal Reserve to step in, something they have already done by raising the interest rate to 0.25%. While this doesn't seem like a lot, there are 6 further spikes planned for 2022, which means that all interests will go up this year. As borrowing costs rise, the spending will cool down, bringing the inflation down as well. However, this hasn't always translated into good things for the economy. A mix of inflation and higher interest rates trigger low consumption, as the public then prefers to sit on their savings instead of burning it all in an uncertain time. Lower spending results in lower production, which means the economy contracts further. The last time the Fed stepped in was during the housing crisis of the 2000s that eventually resulted in the Great Recession. Maybe we can wait this one out and think of it as a temporary situation, but that's not an option. Once a war is underway, the phenomenon called the fog of war takes over. No party exactly knows the other's intentions and prefers staying on the offensive. Just recently, the Ukrainian president announced that Russian forces may attack Kiev again if the city of Donbass falls. So we should be preparing our economy for the long haul, because the inflation and uncertainty won't remain limited to the gas stations. Oil impacts everything from electricity prices to food items, and from manufacturing to transportation costs. While these impacts may not be visible straight away, a longer war will almost certainly bring these problems to the fore. It's not just the oil, though. Russia and Ukraine make up a large part of the global neon market. Neon is critical to the semiconductor making process, and if the supply is disrupted, The chip shortage will have major implications for everything from consumer electronics to vehicles. How big of an impact this war will create is too early to predict. Despite facing a real economic threat, the US is far from being the most impacted region in the world. In fact, Europe will bear far greater consequences for now. Western Europe is one of the most energy-dependent regions, with not many natural energy resources available. Just last year, Russia exported more than 70% of its natural gas to European countries, and almost half of its crude oil exports also went to Europe. Since the Ukraine war, Germany has cancelled its Nord Stream 2 pipeline with Russia, so the continent may soon need to find alternative sources. However, that still won't solve the supply chain problems, since Russia is practically next door. Europe's impending economic issues will have a spillover effect on its oldest ally, the United States of America. To understand how this will happen, let's get back to the global world order for a bit and understand how it binds the world economy together. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, it was widely believed that American capitalism had prevailed over all other ideologies. There was some truth to it, because for the next decade or so, free markets thrived. Complex trade dependencies among nations increased at a rapid pace, with the United States finding a new top trading partner in China. The export of goods, technologies, and weapons also gave way to an export of ideas. Together with the European allies, the United States set out to create a peaceful Europe based on its own ideas of democracy, free markets, and economic interdependence. Some of the biggest multinationals saw unprecedented growth, from the United States to Europe and the rest of the world. Today, corporate giants based in the US derive a big chunk of profit from Europe's present war zone. Philip Morris, for example, derives 8% of its revenue from Eastern Europe. Similarly, there are many other US companies with major stakes in Europe. So a slowdown in the European economy will result in lower stock prices at home, starting a chain reaction of a downward economic spiral. These mounting problems for the economy may turn out to be even more devastating if Russia decides to have some retribution for increasingly strict sanctions. One option Putin has is to cut off the oil supply to the world altogether. This can potentially increase oil prices more than 50%, straining the world economy to unprecedented levels. However, this extreme step might not be possible for Russia, as the country itself is witnessing an economic collapse. Since the start of the Ukraine offensive, hundreds of multinationals have left the country, pushing the government at the brink of a default. The oil payments from Europe are a lifeline for the crumbling economy, so Putin may not go down that route as of yet. But again, all bets are off if the war escalates or goes on for a longer period. We have to acknowledge that there are more pressing issues confronting the US, other than inflation and economic stability. There's a humanitarian crisis to deal with, and a democracy to defend. However, as the world scrambles to find an appropriate response to Russian aggression, there are policies that need revisiting at home. While everything will be done to find an amicable solution to the war, it might also be a time for an ideological change. The Great Recession, COVID-19, and now the Ukraine war has shown us that the profitability of global economic linkages is diminishing. A connected economy is vulnerable to every event of instability, and though the current conflict may pass, who knows what will happen when the next major calamity strikes our interdependent world. Do you think the Russian invasion will have meaningful consequences for the US? Let me know in the comments. And if you learned something new from this, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to be the first to see our new videos. I make deep dives like this every week, where I uncover the secrets of money and business.